Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of We Should Cook That, where I take a look back at some of the best foods I've ever eaten and try to recreate them. This week, we're taking a look at the GMB found at the Gray Market in Savannah, Georgia. This burger will thoroughly blow your hair back if you're not careful, so grab your favorite bonnet and let's try it out. The first and most important step to this recipe is to make sure that you cook pizza a few nights before and burn your wrist on the 550-degree oven. I'm totally kidding, please don't do that, but we actually are going to start off by making some pickles. For this, we're going to make a basic pickling liquid of water, vinegar, salt, sugar, peppercorns, and mustard seeds. I toss in a few cloves of garlic for flavor as well, and some red pepper flakes for some heat. Seal them up, toss them in the fridge, and let's get started on our bread. Now the Gray Market makes their own potato buns, so wave goodbye to your Saturday and proceed to chop up one large potato. While the potato cooks in some boiling water, we're going to add our dry ingredients, including 2 1/4 cups of flour, a teaspoon of salt, a tablespoon of sugar, and 2 teaspoons of instant yeast. Now it turns out that in order to successfully make most breads, you need to use bread flour. So if you prefer flat buns, go ahead and make your potato buns with all-purpose flour like I decide to here. Once your potatoes are nice and soft, go ahead and mash them up with 2 tablespoons of butter and add a cup of the still warm concoction to your dry ingredients. It's important that the potato mash remains warm, as the heat will actually help bring life to your yeast. Next, add a single egg of the chicken as well as 5 tablespoons of the leftover potato liquid I didn't tell you to preserve earlier. Now we're going to let the food processor do its thing for a little while until we see that a cohesive ball of dough starts to form. Ideally, we would be using a stand mixer for this, but if you're like me and your wedding isn't for a couple of months, you won't own one yet, so the food processor will have to suffice. After the dough is formed, we're going to generously flour our work surface and turn out our dough onto the table. And as you should see right about here, the dough should be a little bit sticky. This is totally normal and is in fact encouraged in the recipe that I am following. Now, if you noticed in that last shot, I was actually holding the food processor blade by the blade and ended up slicing my finger open. So now that we have 2 visible flesh wounds, let's go ahead and knead this dough. I'll be honest with you, I'm not really entirely sure how much kneading is supposed to be done in this dough, which very well may have been part of the reason that these buns ended up so flat, but this looks good. So let's go ahead and lightly oil 1 glass bowl, drop our ball of dough into said bowl and seal it up. Set this aside for roughly 30 to 40 minutes until it's risen. And let's get started on some of the best onions you'll ever have in your life. Go ahead and chop them up. Place 2 tablespoons of butter and a drizzling of olive oil into your pan. Place your onions into said pan and turn up the volume. Oh yeah, now that's what I'm talking about. These onions are probably the best thing that's ever happened to me in my life, so go ahead and write that down. Once your dough has doubled, or in my case, singled in size, go ahead and turn it out onto a lightly floured work surface where we will begin to roll it out. Rejoice as unsightly flesh wound number 2 has stopped bleeding. Let's go ahead and flour this guy and then roll it out into about an 8 by 8 inch square, which we're going to cut into 9 pieces. Cover them up with some plastic wrap and let's get started rolling them into balls. Working with each individual square, roll the dough into tight balls and return them to the floured work surface, where we will let them rest for the next 15 minutes. 15 minutes later, return to your balls and flatten them into approximately 3.5 inch discs, making sure to push out any large air bubbles from the dough. So this is what my buns look like after about an hour. They definitely rose a little bit, but not quite as much as I would have liked. I even cranked up the heat in my house to 77 degrees, but alas, here we are. Use bread flour. Now I'm sprinkling half of these with sesame seeds because I love sesame seed buns, but since the Gray Market doesn't use them, I'm leaving half without. After about 15 minutes at 425, pull them out and be pleasantly surprised by the way they turned out. I have to say, despite it being the first time I've ever made these, they are immensely better than any store-bought potato buns I've ever had, and I highly recommend making them. Well, now that that's done and I've changed into a fresh pair of pants, let's go ahead and toss a slice of all-American cheese on our delicious slab of meat. And now to assemble the burger. Place the patty first, followed by our caramelized onions from heaven, our ever so slightly spicy pickles, a smear of comeback sauce which I made a few days ago, and that's pretty much all she wrote. I have to say, this is easily the best burger I've ever made in my life, and although the Great Market Burger in Savannah will always hold a place in my heart, at least I can rest assured knowing I don't have to drive 5 hours to have one. All I need is about 6 free hours on a Saturday.